Fritz from earthhealing.info. We're going to talk about the gifts of Appalachian trees. The gift we means that it's a great blessing that we have to have so many trees. This is part of the mixed mesophytic forest, which goes all the way from western Pennsylvania to northern Alabama. And it is the oldest temperate forest in the world. And it is the most varied of the temperate forests. We have over 100 varieties of trees. Now, to naming a few will only make you confused, but we must remember it's a lifetime work for us to come to know and to learn and respect the trees. So therefore, if it's getting you frustrated, then pick up a book that's on trees and begin slowly to gather and then go out and see and identify and deal with the trees that are in your area. We do need experts on trees, and those experts can help us when we want to put a new one into our place, which one is the best to choose, deciding on what we're trying to do with the tree that we have. There are many uses of trees. We're going to be talking about those in general and only occasionally bring up an example of what they are. On these grounds, we have over 30 varieties, and we're trying hard to make this an edible landscaping. That is, not that we eat the landscape, but that the landscape itself provides for us the food that we can use or that the animals can use. So let's just take one quick look at this. We first think about the trees that we planted here. We have a variety of apple trees, and we have next to them over here, we have some plum trees, and then we have had peach trees, and we have two small ones down there that are starting up as another generation. The others have died out, and we had to kill them this past year. Then on the hillside we have pear trees, and then there's a mulberry up there on the hill, and that is food for both humans and for animals, and we can talk about that too. But anyway, not only do we have the fruit trees, we also have the nut trees. And so we can see in the distance a very spindly type of tree that's very tall. That's one of our pecans, one of 3 pecans that we've got that will be bearing in years to come. Okay, down here we have really an example of the hazelnut, which is a filbert type, and we have 2 of those, and they're bearing already. And it's good to have those type of nut trees too. Also, if we swing around to the building itself, we are looking at the walnut tree up here near the house, which is a black walnut, and that will be bearing in a few years also, as a good example. Now we move underneath the mulberry is a holly, and that has berries on it, and it's a woody species that is good for the animals during the winter time, and we see them when they eat them when they get hungry. And another, as we swing around here, is right near us, is a northern catalpa tree, which is actually a fish bait tree, and when they're put underneath over a pond or something, they'll have worms on there, and the worms will fall off, and the fish love to have them for food. We see a hawthorn tree here, and that has berries on it. And the small ones are already starting to grow in springtime, but by fall there will be a nice big red berry, and the animals love those too, the birds, and so it's another of the foods that we have, the edible landscaping, in order to help us and them have enough to eat. We move on to the more commercial uses of our trees, and one of these is to actually save energy, both save energy in summertime with shade, and there we look across our street and we see a magnolia, which is a beautiful shade tree that is for the building there. When the sun comes from the south in that direction, it helps keep cool the place. We used to have an American elm, got 125 years old, but it died on us, and we had to remove it, but it was a tremendous shade protection that we had that also gave economic value to us for not having to pay so much for cooling. In the opposite, there are some trees that are good, and we'll show an example of a cedar, a juniper tree, that is really could be put as shade. There are a number of varieties, some of which are from other parts of the world, and we don't propose to always bring in outside trees. We'd rather use our own, but that cedar can also be used as a privacy barrier. You put it up in a place where people want to have a swimming pool or something around them, and it's a very good tree to have for that. Most people know our woods and our trees for lumber purposes. And of course, when we once had a American chestnut that has since died out, but it's being replaced. But those were tremendous trees for absolute use in structural building. And we also have oaks and birch and beech and other trees that are shade, but also that can be cut in timber. We have some spraggly looking trees over here that are really the black locust, and the black locust can be used for posts. They just simply don't rot very quickly, and they're an excellent tree to have around too. But there's really, we are not growing trees for lumber here. That is not our purpose, and we must remember that the hills around us are covered with trees too. Now we have more trees than we had even in the mid-1800s, when at this county, most of the trees had been cut out in order to make charcoal for the smelting industry that was heavy at that time. And so the use of trees had greater use at that time than they do now. And so we've gone from a 20% coverage of trees then to around half now of the landscape, and countryside is filled with trees. And we're happy that this is happening in our state. Really, we can't forget that wood can be used for fuel, as we just mentioned, for the charcoal, but also it has been used for years for both trains and also for private homes. And it is a renewable resource. At the same time, we have other ways in which we can heat the house in wintertime. But we do not have fuel trees here. There are, except maybe one, and that is we have a tulip poplar on our hillside, which could be used for lumber too, and it's growing, it's coming into place at this time. Not only are trees good as sightseeing for people who are at a distance and come and visit, but they also are something that gives us local health. We never think about that, but if we have a tree in our front yard, or one that we can look at different times, it gives us a sense of contentment and calms our nerves in many things. We can work with trees, and in working with trees, we learn a lot ourselves. I remember my father taught us how to use a cross-cut saw. He would be on one side and I'd be on the other for cutting logs. And we would have to pull at exactly the right second. And then we pull, then he pulls, and then we. It was a coordination that we learned to do as young people, and it was something that gave an example of where we are working with trees in some way. And so there are many examples that we can have of pruning and of doing different aspects of planting trees. All of these are things that people should be invited to do because it adds to the health of our planet and ourselves. There are a number of uses of trees that we can put in the category of the ecology that we're trying to hold on to in the world. The first is they retain some of the carbon dioxide that's excessive in the world around us now. And so we think of forests that way, or that the lungs of the planet, and therefore they're furnishing the oxygen that we need to live on. So therefore we can look at trees that way from a very general viewpoint, or we can think of them in terms of soil conditioning and retention, which is put in many places where we plant trees so that the soil will be held in place. And so we can move on then to others, is that it's a habitat. Really, the trees around here that you're seeing are a habitat for both wildlife, mammals, and also for the birds. In other words, we have to live with the wildlife that we have, but they're a wonderful thing to have around, and our trees are the habitat in which they live, their nest, their way of resting. The trees are great examples also of what is under the understory, and that is, of course, the mushrooms that we have in this area, and also the wildflowers that come, especially in April and May before the foliage is full. And therefore, the trees furnish part of the grounds on which the fullness of our plant life can live, and animal life too. So we can look at trees then in a full sense as being a very important and key part of the full ecology of our world. And we should be planting as many of these trees as we possibly can. Have deep respect for them, as we said originally, and try in some ways to influence other people to respect, love, and actually nurture the trees that we have. In a conclusion, we have a book that's called The Gift of Appalachian Trees that's available through Amazon books, and we do expect it has many stories about our relationships with trees. We didn't cover a lot of area, and we didn't even cover more than a third of the trees that we have on this property alone. But at the same time, we must remember we are all invited to learn more about what we've got. And so this is Al Fritsch at earthhealing.info. Come and visit us sometime.